feel like I feel like sexy ends when it's when I'm not sexiest man alive anymore. I don't feel like it exists anymore. I feel like it's over whenever I was sexiest man alive.
You know Blake Shelton as a funny country star who makes us laugh on The Voice and sings those catchy songs we all love. He seems like he's got it all figured out with his big smile and easygoing personality. But behind that charming grin lies a story so heartbreaking that it would bring tears to anyone's eyes. At 49 years old, Blake Shelton has lived through tragedies that would break most people, yet somehow he keeps going, keeps singing, and keeps making others smile while his own heart carries wounds that may never fully heal. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just about a country music superstar. It's about a little boy who lost everything that mattered to him in the worst possible way. It's about how one terrible moment can change a person forever, and how sometimes the people who seem the happiest are the ones carrying the heaviest pain. This is the real Blake Shelton story that most people don't know, and once you hear it, you'll never look at him the same way again. It all started on a cold November day in 1990 in rural Oklahoma. Blake was just 14 years old, a normal teenager with dreams and hopes like any other kid his age. But November 13th would become the day that split his life into two parts, before the tragedy and after. On that day, his world came crashing down in the most unimaginable way. Blake's older brother Richie was 24 years old, and everything Blake wanted to be when he grew up. Richie wasn't just a brother to Blake. He was his hero, his role model, and his best friend all rolled into one. In a small town like Ada, Oklahoma, brothers stick together, and these two were especially close. Richie was the kind of big brother every kid dreams of having. He was cool, he was fun, and he always had time for his little brother Blake. That November morning started like any other day. No one could have predicted that it would end in absolute devastation. Richie was riding as a passenger in a car with his 20-year-old girlfriend. She was driving, and they had her 3-year-old son with them in the car. It should have been a normal drive, the kind of trip people take hundreds of times without thinking twice about it. But as they were driving over a hill on that rural Oklahoma road, something went terribly wrong. The girlfriend was driving when she suddenly came upon a school bus that had stopped to pick up students. She didn't see it in time. The car slammed into the back of that school bus with such force that it changed everything in an instant. In that horrible moment, 3 lives were lost. Richie, the big brother who meant everything to Blake, was gone. The young woman who was driving was gone. And her innocent 3-year-old son, who had his whole life ahead of him, was gone too. Just like that, in the time it takes to blink, a family was destroyed and a 14-year-old boy's world was shattered into a million pieces. When Blake found out what had happened, he later described it as feeling like the world went silent. Can you imagine being 14 years old and getting that kind of news? At an age when your biggest worry should be about homework or asking someone to a school dance, Blake was suddenly faced with a loss so devastating that it would haunt him for the rest of his life. Richie wasn't just Blake's brother. He was his musical inspiration, too. Richie played guitar and sang, and he was the one who first got Blake interested in country music. Those two brothers would sit together and play music, with Richie teaching Blake everything he knew. When Blake picked up his first guitar, it was because he wanted to be just like his big brother. Every chord Blake learned, every song he sang, was connected to Richie in some way. After the accident, Blake was left not just with grief, but with confusion and anger that no teenager should have to carry. He couldn't understand why something so terrible had to happen to someone so good. He couldn't make sense of why his hero, his best friend, his brother, had been taken away from him just when life was getting started. The house that used to be filled with music and laughter became quiet and sad. Blake's parents, Dick and Dorothy Shelton, were dealing with their own unbearable grief while trying to help their surviving son cope with his loss. Losing a child is every parent's worst nightmare, but watching your other child suffer through that loss adds another layer of heartbreak that's almost impossible to bear. The whole family was drowning in grief, and nobody really knew how to swim to the surface. In small towns like Ada, Oklahoma, everybody knows everybody. When a tragedy like this happens, the whole community feels it. Blake couldn't go anywhere without people looking at him with those sad, pitying eyes that reminded him over and over again of what he had lost. School became almost impossible because everywhere he looked, he was reminded that his brother would never walk through those halls again, never pick him up after school, never be there to give him advice about girls or bullies or any of the things big brothers are supposed to help with. Music became Blake's way of dealing with the pain, but it was also a constant reminder of Richie. Every time he picked up a guitar, he could hear his brother's voice teaching him how to play. Every song he learned was something Richie might have taught him if he had lived. It was both healing and heartbreaking at the same time. Blake found himself caught between wanting to honor his brother's memory through music and wanting to run away from anything that reminded him of what he had lost. The teenage years are hard enough when everything is going right. When you had the kind of devastating loss Blake experienced, those years become almost unbearable. He struggled in school, not because he wasn't smart, but because it was hard to care about algebra or history when your whole world had been turned upside down. His friends didn't know what to say to him because what do you say to someone whose brother has died in such a terrible way? Most teenagers have never even thought about death, let alone had to live with it every single day. But somehow, Blake kept going. Maybe it was because he knew Richie would have wanted him to. Maybe it was because music gave him a way to feel close to his brother again. Or maybe it was just because giving up would have meant letting the tragedy win, and Blake was too strong for that, even at 14 years old. He threw himself into his music with a passion that bordered on desperation, as if playing guitar and singing could somehow bring Richie back or at least make the pain hurt a little less. As Blake got older and started to make a name for himself in country music, he carried Richie's memory with him everywhere he went. When he moved to Nashville to chase his dreams, he wasn't just chasing his own dreams. He was chasing the dreams that he and Richie had talked about together. Every success he achieved felt hollow because the one person he most wanted to share it with wasn't there to see it. The tragedy followed Blake into his adult life in ways that people don't often talk about. When you lose someone that important when you're so young, it changes how you see the world. It makes you realize that nothing is guaranteed and that the people you love can be taken away from you without warning. This kind of loss can make it hard to get close to people because you're always afraid of losing them too. Blake's struggles weren't over after losing Richie. Life seemed determined to test him again and again. In 2012, when Blake was already a successful country music star, another tragedy struck his family. His father, Dick Shelton, passed away after a long period of declining health. Blake was 35 years old when he lost his dad, but losing a parent when you've already lost a sibling brings back all those feelings of helplessness and grief that you thought you had learned to manage. Dick Shelton had been Blake's rock after Richie died. He was the one who helped Blake channel his grief into his music, and who supported his dreams of becoming a country music star. When Dick died, Blake lost not just his father, but one of the last connections he had to those memories of his family before everything changed. It was like losing a piece of Richie all over again. The pain of these losses has shaped everything about who Blake Shelton became as a person and as an artist. If you listen carefully to his music, you can hear the sadness underneath the fun, upbeat songs. You can hear a man who knows what it's like to lose the people who matter most. When he sings about love, he sings like someone who knows how precious and fragile it is. When he sings about family, he sings like someone who knows you should never take a single day with them for granted. Blake has always been open about how much Richie's death affected him, but he doesn't talk about it to get sympathy. He talks about it because he wants people to understand that grief doesn't just go away. It becomes part of who you are. Even now, more than 30 years after the accident, Blake still carries that 14-year-old boy's pain with him. He's learned to live with it and even to find joy despite it, but it never completely goes away. One of the most beautiful and heartbreaking ways Blake has honored Rich's memory is through his music. When he was married to Miranda Lambert, the two of them wrote a song called Over You that was directly about losing Richie. The song talks about the pain of losing someone you love and how that person's memory stays with you forever. When Miranda sang that song, she was singing Blake's pain, telling the world about the tragedy that shaped the man she loved. The lyrics of Over You are simple but devastating. They talk about how rain reminds Blake of the day he lost his brother, and how he still sometimes reaches for the phone to call Richie before remembering that he's not there anymore. The song captures a feeling that anyone who has lost someone important knows, the feeling that part of your heart is missing and will always be missing. But Blake's story isn't just about tragedy and loss. It's also about incredible strength and the power of the human spirit to keep going even when everything seems hopeless. The fact that Blake was able to take his pain and turn it into music that touches millions of people shows just how strong he really is. He could have let the grief consume him. He could have given up on his dreams and settled for quiet, sad life. Instead, he chose to honor his brother by living the dreams they had talked about together. Throughout his career, Blake has used his platform to help other people who are dealing with loss. He understands what it's like to feel like your world is ending, and has never forgotten what it feels like to be that heartbroken 14-year-old boy. When he meets young people who have lost family members, he doesn't just offer empty words of comfort. He shares his story and shows them that it's possible to survive even the worst kind of pain. Blake's journey through grief has also affected how he approaches relationships. His marriages to Kaynet Jern and Miranda Lambert both ended in divorce, and while there were many factors involved in those breakups, it's not hard to imagine how difficult it must be to love someone who carries that kind of pain. When you've lost someone as important as Richie was to Blake, it can be hard to let yourself be vulnerable enough to truly love again, because you know how much it hurts when that love is taken away. But Blake didn't give up on love. His relationship with Gwen Stefani has shown a different side of him, a side that seems more at peace with his past and more willing to be happy in the present. Maybe time has helped him heal, or maybe Gwen has helped him see that it's possible to honor Rich's memory while still allowing himself to be happy. Either way, seeing Blake find love and happiness again after everything he's been through is a testament to his strength and resilience. Even now, at 49 years old, Blake still talks about Richie regularly. He mentions him in interviews, dedicates songs to him, and keeps his memory alive in countless small ways. On the anniversary of Richie's death each November, Blake often posts tributes on social media, sharing memories and photos and making sure the world knows that his brother is still very much a part of his life. What makes Blake's story so heartbreaking isn't just the tragedy itself, it's the fact that he was so young when it happened. 14 years old is barely more than a child, and yet Blake had to learn lessons about loss and grief that most adults never have to face. He had to figure out how to live with a broken heart when he should have been worried about things like school dances and baseball games. But what makes his story inspiring is that he didn't let the tragedy define him in a negative way. Instead of becoming bitter or angry at the world, Blake chose to use his pain as fuel for his music and as a way to connect with other people who were hurting. He turned his greatest loss into his greatest strength, and in doing so, he created a legacy that Richie would be proud of. The tragedy of Blake Shelton isn't just that he lost his brother in a terrible accident. The tragedy is that a young boy had to grow up too fast and learn to live with a pain that will never completely go away. But the miracle of Blake Shelton is that he took that pain and turned it into something beautiful. He took his grief and used it to create music that has brought joy to millions of people. He took his loss and used it to become someone who can comfort others who are going through their own dark times. When you see Blake Shelton on stage or on television, laughing and joking and making other people smile, remember that behind that smile is a man who knows what real pain feels like. Remember that every joke he tells and every song he sings is a victory over the grief that could have destroyed him. Remember that the reason he can bring so much joy to other people is because he knows how precious and fragile happiness really is. Blake's story reminds us that we never really know what someone is going through. The people who seem the happiest might be the ones who have fought the hardest battles. The people who make us laugh might be the ones who have cried the most tears. And the people who seem to have it all together might be the ones who have had to rebuild their lives from nothing more than broken pieces and shattered dreams. At 49 years old, Blake Shelton has achieved more success than most people could ever dream of. He has sold millions of records, won countless awards, and become one of the most recognizable faces in country music. But none of those achievements can bring back the brother he lost when he was just 14 years old. None of those accolades can fill the hole that Rich's death left in his heart. That's the real tragedy of Blake Shelton, not that he's a sad person or that has been defeated by his loss, but that no matter how successful he becomes, no matter how many people love him or how many dreams he achieves, there will always be that empty space where Richie should be. There will always be moments when he wants to call his brother and share good news, only to remember that the phone will never be answered. There will always be songs that remind him of sitting with Richie and learning to play guitar. There will always be that 14-year-old boy inside him who just wants his big brother back. But maybe that's also what makes Blake Shelton so special. Maybe the reason his music touches so many people is because it comes from a place of real pain and real loss. Maybe the reason he can make people laugh is because he knows how important it is to find joy wherever you can. Maybe the reason he's been able to help so many other people through his music and his story is because he's never forgotten what it feels like to be broken and to somehow find a way to keep going anyway. The tragedy of Blake Shelton is heartbreaking, but it's also a reminder of the incredible strength of the human spirit. It's a story about how love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form. It's about how the people we lose can still inspire us and guide us and help us become better than we ever thought we could be. Most of all, it's about how sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most broken hearts. So the next time you hear Blake Shelton singing about love or loss or the importance of family, listen a little closer. Hear the pain underneath the melody, but also hear the hope. Hear the story of a 14-year-old boy who lost everything and somehow found a way to turn that loss into something that brings joy to millions of people. Hear the voice of someone who knows that life is precious and fragile and should never be taken for granted. Blake Shelton's tragedy is beyond heartbreaking, but his response to that tragedy is beyond inspiring. He shows us that it's possible to carry great pain and still find great joy. He shows us that losing someone doesn't have to mean losing hope. And he shows us that sometimes the people who have been through the worst things are the ones who can teach us the most about how to live, how to love, and how to keep going when everything seems impossible. That's the real Blake Shelton, not just a country music star or television personality, but a man who has looked tragedy in the face and refused to let it win. A man who has taken his deepest pain and turned it into his greatest gift to the world. A man who proves every day that no matter how broken your heart might be, you can still find a way to sing. If Blake's story has touched your heart like it has touched mine, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Stories like this remind us that we're all fighting battles that others can't see, and sometimes just knowing that someone else has been through something similar and survived can make all the difference. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about the real life behind the famous faces we think we know. And remember, no matter what you're going through, if Blake Shelton can turn his greatest tragedy into his greatest triumph, maybe you can too.